Hello students, welcome to Eduxcite classes. We are continuing with our previous video. Now we will discuss about the exploration. Those who don't watch my previous video, please check the playlist and get back to those videos and then replay it. Okay. Now the second criteria is the exploration. Now exploration start with formulating your RQ, that is your research question that we have discussed in our previous video. Research the background theory of your topic. Now when you are selecting a topic, now that topic has its own theory as well as the concept related to that. So you should explain it in a background research, like you have chosen a particular topic. Now in that topic, what are the laws or the concepts or the theory or the equations related to that particular topic? That should explain, that will give support to your research, to your IA, not research question, to your IA. So whatever the topic you have chosen, there should be a proper background theory for your topic. And one more important thing while writing down the background theory is, guys, like for example, I say you are making your investigation is on let us say finding out the terminal velocity. Now finding out the terminal velocity, we know that what are the concepts related to terminal velocity is reached when all your forces are balanced. Now you can give the theory of the forces involved in your particular investigation. There are different types of forces. What are the forces you are dealing with? Mention those forces. What are the application of those forces? How the forces are acting. You can give the concept of terminal velocity, when it has been reached, how it has been reached, how you will identify when the terminal velocity is reached, or any mathematical calculation involved in finding out the terminal velocity which is supporting your IA. So this whole thing is all about the theoretical aspect of your IA. Now while mentioning those, either you can mention in your own words, you can refer some textbooks, some papers from any internet resources, but make sure that you mention it in your references or bibliography, whatever you say. In text footnotes are acceptable, as well as you have to mention at the end of the investigation, these are your references. So it will avoid you from coming out from the plagiarism. And make sure you do not just copy and paste it. Okay, you refer it from somewhere. If that is an equation, that doesn't matter. Equation we cannot change. Okay, you can mention the equation, but please refer from where you have taken that particular thing. While writing down the theory, do not just copy and paste. Read it, understand it, and write down in your own words, in your framing your own sentence, which doesn't hinder the understanding of the concept. Okay, so make sure you write down in your own language, which will avoid from the plagiarism. But at the same time, you can refer that I have taken this aspect from this resource. Okay. Now the next is describe your variables and the method. Now variables, as I stated earlier, there are three variables associated: independent, dependent, and control. We will discuss each in detail in the coming slides. Next is reflect on the limitations. What could go wrong with your study? Like we know that whenever we are dealing with an hands-on experiment or a investigation or a research, what we are expecting, ideally it might get differ in a practical, in a real life situation. So what are the limitations that are affecting your investigation? Please mention those things which may be under your control, which may not be under your control. So please specify those things. Consider the environmental and ethical side effects. Now when you are conducting, there might be some side effects, environmental safety precautions. Please write down all those things that will add up your exploration criteria. Never copy or your research question you find on the internet or from past students' work. Please, very important, guys, do not copy and paste any other works or any other research question from past students' work. Okay, try to make it your own. You can refer something, you can take ideas, you can take something into it, but make it your own. Like if you are like the topics are all over common, okay, so but the thing is how you make that investigation your own, how you add up your own interest, your own creative and independent thinking. That is the most required thing. So don't just copy and paste. You can refer, you can get some ideas, but now then use your own methodology, use your own ideas and reframe a interesting research question. Now, exploration, the background of your study should provide all the necessary information that provide the scientific constant of your investigation and setting of the variables. That you have mentioned everything, you have mentioned what are the variables, this is your background theory. Then the method, a well written method is more than the protocol for the data collection. Like when you are performing an experiment, you mention a procedure. The procedure should be your own. It should not be like a step by step you are mentioning. It should be your own. You are explaining to someone. It should be in that manner. Selection and monitoring of the variables. How you select the variables, which will be your independent variable, which will be your dependent variable, which will be your control variable. How you will monitor those, how will you measure those variables. Everything should be clearly mentioned. Collection of data should be relevant, reliable and sufficient. It should be relevant to your research question. What are you finding? It should be reliable. You can rely on your data. It should not be a fake or a vague data. And it should be sufficient enough to make a particular conclusion of your research question or your IA. If you are finding something, if you are finding a relationship, there should be a sufficient data so that you can conclude something. It should not like you have taken 1 or 2 trials only and you are making okay by just looking at the referring the data from the trials 1 and 2 we came to this conclusion. No, it should be minimum, I should say 5 to 7 trials you must take. 7 is the safer side, but if somewhat there might be limitations for your IA, whatever the topics you are choosing, so 5 to 7 readings, sufficient data must be there. I am not saying that you have to take 5 readings only. For 5 each reading you have to take different trials as well, that we will discuss in the analysis. I will take some examples and I will show you how the readings are supposed to be considered and how you have to process the data. Repeating trials of the experiment, as I mentioned, for each at least 3 trials must be taken so that you can minimize the errors or your accuracy or the precision of your data will be increases. Identifying the limitation that may affect your study, running a pre-trial. So before setting up and you are prepared for collecting all your data, make sure you do a pre-trial so that you will get to know what are the problems you are facing, so that you have a sufficient time to resolve those things before actually performing and collecting the data. Now what is independent variable? Now guys, this is the most important part. Many students are still confusing and identifying your independent and dependent, and they just start with their IEs. So you should be very clear. Please watch all my videos to get a clear idea what you are supposed to do in your IE. Now independent variable should be measurable and you should explain the logic behind the range. This is very important. You should be behind the range. What is your range and intervals of it? From which range to which range you are collecting your data and at what intervals you are keeping a different gaps in between the data. It should be justified by you. Okay. So also the range and the interval should be realistic and not too far apart. It should be realistic. Okay. So independent variable is the variable which you are changing in order to get different readings. Okay. So as grouping different factors as one independent, avoid grouping different factors as one independent variable. You should consider one independent variable at a time. It should not be like you are finding the effect of many variables with respect to a dependent variable. No, it should be avoid it as much as possible. Consider only one variable at a time. For instance, if you study thermal properties of different material, for example, you should specify a measurable property of the material under study. And that may be like, for example, density index. You are measuring the density index of different materials. So in this way you ensure when you shift from materials to material, you are changing the property which is your independent. What you are changing the different material. In changing the different material, what actually is changing is your density index. So you are changing the density index. So in this case, a good research question would be, what is the effect of the density index of different construction material on the thermal conductance? So different density index on the property of your thermal conductance. So thermal conductance is your dependent variable and your density index is your independent variable. So what you are changing is your independent variable, that is the density index, by changing the different material. So by changing the material, density index already changed. So this is your independent variable, and by changing that, what you are measuring is your thermal conductance, that is your dependent variable. Okay. So dependent variable is the variable that you measure in your investigation, as simple as that. It must be specified and measurable. It should be clearly specify what you are measuring. Like the thermal, I am measuring the thermal conductance. Now how I will measure, that is a different aspect. But I am measuring thermal conductance, that I will mention how I will be measuring in my background research or the methodology or the procedure, that whatever you are writing. Okay. Define the dependent variable, how it is related to the system you are investigating. Like you should relate it with your, that this is my dependent variable as this is my research question. Like you have to relate it what you are measuring. Sometimes it happens that you are directly you are not able to measure your dependent variable, but you are measuring something else, from that you can measure the dependent variable. So the linking should be clearly mentioned, what is your dependent variable and what you are measuring. So if it is the same, then you can just say like that. If it is not directly what you are measuring, then how from that part you will measure your dependent variable, that should be mentioned. Explain why the method you have chosen is the best available in your school setting to collect the values of the dependent variable. So for collecting of a dependent variable, you have to mention the best possible way in your school setting, in your school lab, within the given limited or the available resources. Now the controlled variables. Now this is also very important, and many students lose their marks while writing down the control variable because they didn't understand what they are supposed to write it down in this category. So controlled variable is simply all the possible factors. It is not like only one or two, okay. It is all your possible factors that may affect the experiment and become a source of random and systematic error. Like when you are conducting an experiment, there are certain factors that you have to look after which must be constant throughout your experiment. If anything changes in that particular thing, it might affect your investigation. So it may be under your random or systematic error. So all those possible factors you must mention as a controlled variable. Now it is not just mentioning those. In a school setting, it is almost impossible to control all the different factors, but acknowledging as many as possible gives depth in your study and good marks. Mention as many as possible you can think of that might affect your investigation, but it is not mandate that all the control variables are supposed to be controlled, are supposed to be constant, because it is beyond our limitations. Okay. If there are factors that you cannot control, mention how will you monitor their changes and fluctuations. Please mention those. If something is beyond your control, mention how they are fluctuating, how they are changing in your investigation. So this is the idea you can get. Record as many as factors, explain why these 2 points should be mentioned, and I generally suggest my students to make a tabular form in which you just write controlled variable here, why it has to be controlled and how you are going to control. Make a tabular form, mention like for the first is your temperature, just giving an example. So why it should be controlled, how it will affect your investigation, and how you are going to control. So both these answer must be given under the control variable. Second, same method. Mention as much as possible. Now writing down the procedure. So data collected with the procedure should be reliable, as I say. Avoid simplistic method or method with little precision. There may be more than one way to conduct your experiment. So go through all those things. Mention that I have trial this, and from that I came to know that with least more accurate or more precise method is this one, and give reason for it. Sufficient data, number of trials, running of pre-trial, redesigning your procedure must be there. Relevant to your research question, whatever the procedure you are mentioning, it should be very relevant. Throughout your IA, everything you are mentioning should be relevance to your RQ, that is your research question. And the last, and many of the students forget this, that is the safety, ethical and environmental consideration. So whenever we are doing something, whenever you are investigating or experimenting or in researching something, you must consider these considerations. You must do a risk assessment before conducting. Is there any risk associated while performing your experiment? How you plan to dispose of remaining material or chemical if you have used in your investigation. You should try to avoid producing excessive waste in your investigation. You can mention if you want, if it is relevant to your investigation, and impact of your study on the field site. Like if you are conducting, it may not harm anyone else. So you must mention those things. If it is nothing, then just mention there is no environmental loss or ethical or safety needed. Now, what are the do's? As I mentioned everything, so I have compiled all those in the checklist points, so you can refer that. Is the topic of the investigation is identify a relevant and fully focused research question is clearly described. The background information provided for the investigation is entirely appropriate and relevant and enhances the understanding of the context of the investigation. It should be related to your own investigation. It's not like that you have mentioned everything in your background research which is not required at all for your investigation. Please avoid those things. I have seen many students in just order to add up to your pages, you are adding more and more background theory, which is not required at all. If it is relevant to your research question, then it is acceptable. If not, then please avoid that situation. The investigation methodology is highly appropriate to address the research question because it considered nearly all the significant factors that may influence the relevance, reliability and sufficiency of the collected data. The report shows evidence of full awareness of the significant safety, ethical and environmental issues which are relevant to your investigations methodology. Sufficient social and historical as well as scientific background is covered. So you can refer if you are investigating something which has some historical background also, it has been tried and before as and you are making some changes to it, you can mention that part. The method of the analysis and presentation is relevant. The student has identified and focused on an appropriate investigation and one that is interesting. It should be very, while reading out as an examiner, if I am checking or if I am going through an IA, it should interest the examiner while reading it out. Okay, make some sentence in such a manner that it creates some interesting factor while reading, whosoever is reading the investigation. Various sections clearly and concisely state the relevant scientific context which is dovetailed nicely with the physics syllabus. It should not go beyond your syllabus. You have to be within the at the level of a a DP student, or it should be a level of your high school student. If the exploration is based on a simulation, the student must appreciate the limitation of using why you are using a simulation. A justification must be given, and as I stated earlier, a proper mentioning of which type of simulation you are using. Given the limited nature of modeling, the methodology is most appropriate and indeed proves interesting in the case of exploration based on modeling. So you should propose a limited nature like the appropriate and interesting methodology for your investigation. The method used are appropriate for the IBDP program. Okay. So this is the exploration part and it consists of your 6 marks. The highest band is the 5-6. So if you follow up whatever we have discussed in this particular criteria, if you just go through it back, if you want to go through it, just check whether you have mentioned all those things in your exploration, in your IA, then definitely you will be in the 5 to 6 bands. You can check, these are the highlighted words which are nothing but we all have discussed this in our previous slides. So I hope you have liked this video. In the next class we will discuss about the analysis and the most important criteria and the component of your IA, because till the time student come to their analysis part, majority of the student loses their interest and they just because a lots of things you are supposed to submit at that particular time, so you are just in hurry up of submission of your IA. So I will suggest you that you please do not lose your motivation in between, because that will hinder your final marks in your diploma program for your IA, and that is 20% weightage of your complete physics. So in the next class we will discuss about the analysis. If you want a personal guidance for your IA, you can check the details below. Thank you.